thank you. Thanks everyone. I wish I had prepared a different presentation hearing what you're talking about, but I'm really excited to learn from you as well. I mean, I can offer a lot of support about the science behind this stuff, but I'm really excited to hear about your experiences as the most important people in the system that grows. So yeah, I'm just going to give kind of a scattershot overview of some science, and then please just raise a hand with a question at any point, and we can just dive deeper on a topic if you want to. I think we have the room until about 2:30, so we can have a wide-ranging conversation. So yeah, I'm just going to give kind of an overview of like where we're coming from in terms of like our programmatic approach to this work, and then some scientific background. So I'm lucky to work with Rachel as a part of our RCD Regional Ag and Climate Hubs. We got this grant that supports us to do that with in partnership with the Carbon Cycle Institute and the Climate Center. And so we're really focused on carbon farm planning, which is a conservation plan that tries to stack regenerative practices and implement them, usually with a separate pool of funding, but as one form of climate beneficial agriculture or agricultural planning that we're interested in. And then we're really focused on like identifying the barriers and solutions to the regional scale of climate beneficial ag work at RCDs, and then ultimately to advocate for policy that leads to an easier way to do these things. So having programs at the state that are more supportive, having NRCS programs that are more supportive, and to really make this just more accessible to everyone. So, and I think the regional focus is really important, hearing all of your unique perspectives as maybe smaller farmers, you might say, and working with grapes and avocado orchards, I think is really unique in this part of the state. And I know Rachel has talked a lot about the issues with urban encroachment that you all faced on here. So we just want to support everyone on a regional basis and answer those questions on a local level. So kind of big picture, like soil and organic matter, what is the relationship there? As a soil scientist, I get a little focus on this, but that soil is composite material. It's 25% water, 25% air. That can vary depending on where you're at, and then about 45% mineral particles. So that's the stuff that's built up over millions of years and is weathered from geological material, and then maybe about 5% organic matter. That's a lofty number oftentimes for agricultural soils. Sometimes in California, I live in the Central Valley, but oftentimes those soils have less than 1% organic matter, and it causes a lot of issues, a lot of environmental issues that really compound. But kind of why is there this enhanced focus maybe in the past 20 years or so on soil organic matter? I'm sure you all have heard it a lot more in recent memory. There's this initiative that kind of started out in France that basically said if we annually increase 4 parts per million of the world soil surface carbon stocks, that would nearly compensate for the annual increase in carbon dioxide of the atmosphere. So there's really this massive carbon sequestration potential in soils around the world, and you can imagine that it's a small increase, and this is all hypothetical, but it could account for our warming climate and help mitigate that issue. And then another semantic that I think sometimes is lost, but I do think it's important in this conversation, is the difference between soil organic matter and soil organic carbon. So oftentimes they're used interchangeably, but organic matter is not only made up of carbon, it's about 58% soil organic carbon, and so we'll use that correction factor, but this is like the interest in sequestering carbon in the soil is that there's a lot of carbon in soil organic matter. And where does that come from? So ultimately it's all plant derived. So you grow your crops, leaves fall to the ground, and that will become soil organic matter through natural decomposition processes. And when you have a healthier soil, that will probably happen a little bit more efficiently and effectively. And then also, of course, your roots that are in the ground, conserving your roots will allow us to conserve that soil organic matter and carbon, and there's some root exudation processes that also contribute carbon to the soil. So that's really like the basis of this whole process. But I want to assert that I think sometimes it's a little bit lost that soil organic matter actually actively cycles in the soil. So on like a per atom basis, this is not a static process. If you have an atom of carbon that's in your soil, it will not stay in that exact same place all the time. It's going to be cycled through microbes, it could be cycled through plant material, through other animal material, but as long as you're managing your system in a way to preserve carbon and to increase carbon, it will lead to net soil carbon sequestration. And then it's kind of a heavy slide, but the idea here is that carbon farming, as pioneered by the Carbon Cycle Institute, is really another way to talk about a diversity of practices that will conserve and increase soil organic matter content, and also introducing woody biomass on farm landscapes to sequester carbon in that standing woody biomass. So this is, a number of practices, and I'm sure you all are really familiar with, like no-till planting, and if there's some interest in that. Or reduced till would also be a carbon farming practice, but also things that might be a little bit more outside of the typical scope, like riparian restoration on farmland, or silvopasture, when animals are grazed through either an orchard system or trees are planted on a rangeland system, and they're used as a nutrient and carbon management strategy in that landscape. But really the idea here is that in making a carbon farm plan, it's a conservation plan where a planner will come out who's trained in this and look at the total number of practices that could be implemented on your piece of land and tailor it to your property, and then would work with you to find funding to actually implement that plan. So wouldn't just be looking at compost application, would be looking at compost and cover crops and reduced tillage and riparian restoration, and a number of things that would both improve your soil function and mitigate climate change. Any questions so far? Take a moment for questions. Cool. We also want to talk a little bit about soil organic matter and nitrogen cycling. I'm sure you all are familiar with this, but this, it's an important and complex process, and I also like to say that it's a really messy process. Nitrogen is kind of a loose element. It's lost through multiple pathways, both in the water and into the air, and this is a big problem in terms of the impacts of agriculture on climate change. Oftentimes synthetic nitrogen is applied, and it's not really well integrated into the soil chemistry when it's applied, and so that's when you have like nitrous oxide emissions, which are a lot smaller percentage of the greenhouse gases than CO2, but a lot more potent, and things like nitrate leaching into groundwater or runoff to surface waters. So I won't really talk about all of this because but I'm happy to answer questions about it. But the idea of the role of soil organic matter in nitrogen cycling is really this piece here of the mineralization and immobilization. So when you have a more organic soil, you have soil microbes, heterotrophs that would be mediating this cycle. And when you have when most of your nitrogen comes from a synthetic fertilizer, this piece is kind of gone, and you're applying ammonium or some form of ammonium or something that becomes ammonium really quickly, and then you go into these different processes. But that's when you're going to see a lot more loss pathways. But when you have an organic system that relies more on soil organic nitrogen, it's not going to come overnight. You have to build it up through the practices that I've just outlined to increase your organic matter. And again, 58% of organic matter is carbon, but I'm forgetting the number, but I think it's like maybe 10% of that could be nitrogen, 7, something like that. And that's where this is coming from. But the availability of that nitrogen is mediated by mineralization processes. So basically breaking down bigger chunks into smaller chunks, and then that would become plant available. So happy to answer questions about that. This is like the fundamentals of where a lot of conversation about agricultural nitrogen, starts. I want to talk a bit about the importance of soil organic matter in improving soil structure. So this is a picture from UC Davis of a soil aggregate, just a chunk, a clod, whatever you want to call it. But this is also something that's important in the conversation about climate change. The more aggregates, the more chunks we have, the more protected that carbon is within that aggregate, and for a really, for the really obvious reason is that it's not exposed to air and water and things that microbes need to consume that soil carbon. So when you're implementing regenerative practices that improve soil health, you're going to have improved soil aggregation, which protects a lot of that soil carbon, and especially, I don't think I have a slide about it here, but when you have the teensy tiny aggregates within that larger aggregate and they become mineral associated, that's also something that's really of interest for climate science in terms of protected soil carbon. But really, how does that get there? Through practices that improve or increase the soil organic matter content of the soil, plant roots, fungal hyphae, root exudates, little debris and polysaccharide glues from soil microbes and fauna, and that's how they get there. Yeah. Any questions so far? You look like you want to say something.
I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
In achieving this, and I'm bringing it back down to what I do, and it's a lot of things that we grape growers do. One of the things that's been popular is the utilization of vermicompost. Yeah, injecting that in the irrigation, and is that actually doing anything? Is that feeding the mycorrhizal network?
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think vermicomposting is a popular option because you can process agricultural waste biomass quickly, and you come up with something that's a little bit more concentrated in nutrients. But fundamentally, the pairing of carbon and nitrogen is really important for organic agriculture and that kind of organic nitrogen cycle that I was talking about. So vermicompost would have a good carbon to nitrogen balance in it, and I think that's a great way to introduce it. I guess if it's going through a drip line, it's staying a little bit more localized to the root zone, but I think that's a great solution.
It's kind of one of those things where it's you're feeding the soil, not the plants, what we're told. And I kind of buy it, but it's just interesting to, sometimes you wonder, is this just black magic? Are they just selling me a product?
Well, I believe it.
Okay.
Well, let me put a corollary to that, okay? Basically, when I'm irrigating, it's all drip. It's 2 emitters, 18 inches across from the center line of the vine. I mean, I'm irrigating an area like this. And I've got a lot of area that I'm not irrigating. I got a lot of area in the aisles that is not irrigated at all. Okay, I don't understand putting humic acid or any of that through my drip line and doing a small area like this. So tell me that it is really worth it.
Okay. I mean, I think it depends on the strategy that you would implement, especially if you're talking about, irrigation efficiency and irrigating a localized zone. So I think something like he's talking about, putting it through your drip line would get it into the area that you're.
Well, my area is like this, up underneath a dripper, okay, and 2 of them on each vine. So it's still a small area, and that's where a lot of the roots are going to be, because that's where the water is, okay? And that's what I irrigate from, I would say, the 1st of July on. The vine is getting the water from the drippers. because all the water that was there from the rains from the winter time is gone.
Right.
So the roots that are out in the aisles, they're not really utilizing this, okay? And I just really question the value of doing that in a small area.
Of irrigating a small area, or of applying
Applying a special thing to improve the soil in two sections that is a very small area of what the vine has roots out for.
Yeah, my thought on that, if I can just interject, is, I mean, I'd like to do it over the whole area, but I want to maximize what my vines are picking up.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is going to help them the uptake of the nutrients that I put in through the drip irrigation, that's the area I'm going to concentrate on, not where I'm doing my cover crop. I want the vines to benefit from the enhanced, organic action right there, so the roots can take care of themselves, hold the nutrients more efficiently.
Yeah, I would agree with that, in that, where you're applying water is where there's going to be the most microbial activity. And so in the practices that you would be implementing to improve soil organic nitrogen cycling and soil organic carbon content in that localized root zone, you would see a benefit as well. But I would say that, something for the aisles, you might have a different management strategy that requires less irrigation, but would still allow the soil to be covered, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, well, I would say that in Southern California, you're getting no rain from the end of April through the end of October.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the soil that's out there is not really active in terms of, for my vines anyway. Is that right?
If I could interject, are we talking about compost and mulch at this point? Is that what you're saying? You don't know that the compost and mulch is benefiting the soil that's not getting watered?
I'm talking about putting something through my drip system that's relatively, like humic acid or
something that's high.
Yeah. Whatever, that's, I question the value of it versus because the roots are there, but that's it. That's the only area that you're watering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there would be, opportunity for different practices, like you're talking about compost or mulch. It could be applied to a larger area, and it would take time to improve the soil, especially with less water addition. But it's a long process. I want to have a moment for you to talk.
I just had a thought. If you apply mulch or whatnot, after like a certain amount of time, your water's going to go down. It's not going to go straight down. It's going to go out, because you're going to have a different soil structure. So it'll kind of travel through depending on what you're working with initially. So I think if you have a better soil structure, then whatever you put in is going to be a lot more beneficial. It's going to travel through different systems, and roots really like good soil, so they'll travel farther out, left, right, anywhere.
Yeah, that's a great point. In that, thinking about a whole farm area, improving all of the soil to some degree will improve that soil structure and allow the capillary movement of water in a healthier way, so to speak. But something like a organic amendment through a drip line would be more localized and would improve the soil health in that localized area, because usually, nitrogen actually cycles really tightly around a root zone. So I'm gonna keep going just to make sure that we have time to cover some more topics, but please keep asking questions. So yeah, great segue to the next point about improved soil structure, improving soil water infiltration. I'm sure this is something you all have seen on your own operations, quite frequently. Is that when you have probably, especially near the base of a plant, when you have more activity, as we're talking about, probably more organic matter, water will go down into the soil more easily. But in an area where you have soil crusting with a lack of aggregation, and maybe farm machinery increasing the compaction of that soil is when you run into issues with soil water level. Yeah, and that, you know, structure like you're talking about, which is such a great point, is improved through better aggregation, and then also, you know, the activity of the soil with things like worms. You know, a healthier soil, you'll have more worms around. They create little channels, and it allows water to move in a dynamic way with the soil. This is a video I took from my old backyard, but just kind of demonstrating this this difference of the kind of a really basic soil infiltration test. This this video is just like under a tree, that a big sycamore tree that had a lot of leaf litter, and some grass or clover was growing there, and there was just natural organic matter buildup. And you can see the difference between difference between how water goes into that soil, how quickly it goes in when there's organic matter, compared to an area where my dogs used to play and wouldn't let any grass or anything grow, and how that water moved across the soil surface because of the lack of organic matter there. And I'll also just add, from like a scientific perspective, this little point is kind of important when you have a really crusted soil and you have a crack there that will form, especially in California clay soils. A lot of them are called vertisols, and they form these kind of like clay plates that go down like this and crack open. And so water can kind of rapidly go down there, but if the water, you know, if that water is contaminated with pesticides or nitrates or some other contaminant, that's getting into the groundwater because of the lack of filter function that the soil is not performing because of the lack of organic matter. Yeah, so then I wanted to talk a little bit about soil water holding capacity too. This is something that, forgetting your name, but thank you for bringing up that point again. What's your name?
Carly.
Carly. So the more organic matter you will have an increased water holding capacity of the soils. And again, it's not something that happens overnight. It has to be from continued good management practices that would improve the soil organic matter content of your soil. But there's a number of ways that this contributes to improved water holding capacity, both through increased porosity from better structure, lower crusting potential, like I just talked about, increased aggregation, soil, water infiltration, increased surface area from the diversity of aggregate sizes and structure that you have, and then also chemically increased absorption capacity, adsorption capacity, and the presence of hydrophilic or like water-loving compounds like polysaccharide gums from a more living soil. So this is just a picture from a kind of older people talking about this. Like you go up by percentage by weight in organic carbon content, you can theoretically expect this improvement in soil water holding capacity. And then water quality, I kind of touched on that a moment, but you know, practices like organic amendment application. I mean, I talked specifically about biochar and composting in a moment, and you know, cover cropping would generally, after time, reduce the need for inorganic fertilizer and pesticide inputs, especially depending on your whole farm management strategy. But you'll have that improved water infiltration and ultimately improved surface water quality from better filter media to groundwater, and a better, you know, reduced runoff to surface water and less inputs going into that surface water. So yeah, and this is from a study that kind of looked at these different management practices and leach nitrate over a growing season.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Which organic amendment would have this effect? Because you're calling it like organic, and is there one specific one that would help with pesticide inputs?
Yes, you should be specific about that, and I won't purport to tell you that I know the answer to all of the problems with these things. I think it's really site specific. But when I say organic amendment, I'm really talking about organic matter amendments, so things like compost, biochar, vermicompost, different types of compost, mulch, things like that. And by organic, I don't necessarily mean organic certified. I mean it has organic carbon in it. So
we just got hit really hard this last year with thrip, and so most of the farmers in Duluth had a crop that we couldn't sell because the avocados were so damaged. This year we're seeing a lot of persiamite, and I'm wondering, is there something that I'm doing wrong because I don't use pesticides per se? I'll use nematodes, or however you pronounce it, and I'm still seeing a lot of thrip, and I'm gonna have to apply even more in hopes, to mitigate some of it, but the damage may already be done.
Yeah, that's a really tough question, and thank you for bringing your real world experience into this. But I would say it's about like holistic management, right? So improving soil takes time, and the amendments that I mentioned and the management strategies I mentioned are ways in which you might do that. But there's also, bringing beneficial insects into the farm, and part of that is not applying pesticides and then having an adverse effect like that, but then also finding ways to attract beneficial insects, like planting, diversified planting strategies that would improve pollinator and wildlife habitat, things like that. Like I'm thinking about our farm tour we went on this morning of, is it Sunset Grove? Was that the name of it? Yeah. But they had a really cool way of integrating in this like area where coffee was planted, different canopy trees and things that flower at different times of the year would attract beneficial insects. That they had really seemed like great success with not applying pesticides and also having beneficial insects come in.
Yeah, we're working on that as well this time.
Great.
So where were they located, Sunset?
They know the area better than I do, yeah.
20 minutes north. Isn't it was an Escondido off of
Okay.
Springs.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be cool to see what they had put in.
Yeah.
We're just picking out our plants right now.
Yeah, that's really tough, and I know that, fortunately with climate change, new pests are coming, the range of pests are getting wider and worse, so, it's a really tough fight, and I really admire all of you for doing it.
Thanks.
Any other questions here, comments? Okay, so then I just wanted to talk about like biochar. Show of hands, how many people have heard about biochar or used biochar? Has anyone here used it? Okay, cool. So yeah, I just want to talk about biochar, some of my experience with biochar. So it's really just charcoal. It's kind of a useless word in my opinion. It's just charcoal produced from organic waste that's used for something other than fuel. Usually we talk about charcoal that's used in other parts of the world as a fuel source and is made from woody biomass, but you can make biochar from anything, usually a waste product, and then it can be used in a number of ways, but we're talking about it today here as a soil amendment. When you combust organic material with a fire, the stuff that's not ash is char, and then producing biochar is just improving that process and limiting oxygen, so you have more leftover charcoal-like material. This is a picture of some almond shell biochar that I worked with in grad school, and this is it in my garden under a squash plant. So how's it made? You can make it in a lot of different ways, but pyrolysis is the word that's used, and this is like organic material that's thermally decomposed in the absence of oxygen. So there's different kind of grades of technology and ways that you could limit that oxygen, but you can dig a pit and kind of cover it as it's smoldering, and you'll end up with a lot of biochar as you're putting that organic material in. There's also I've had various conversations about this method, and I do think that air districts might have different opinions about it, but I would love to have a larger conversation about that. And then, you know, a kiln, a basic kiln that people produce. There's also more conversation about these mobile kilns for on-farm biochar production. And then there's, you know, these biochar companies cropping up, especially in California, that produce it at scale. So they aggregate all of the waste and then produce biochar. And sometimes the goal is actually energy production from the biogas and the biochar is a byproduct. So what's it used for? There's really a number of different applications. It's become really, really popular over the past few years. I'm talking today about like some agricultural applications, but it's used in a number of industries. And you know, if you've been hearing about it, this is kind of taking it back 20 years or so. The basis of why biochar became kind of sexy, for lack of a better word, is that there's these soils in the Amazon that became popular with researchers. They were formed thousands of years ago by indigenous human intervention, but in these naturally nutrient-poor Amazonian oxasols, which, like, from a soil science perspective, are really don't hold on to a lot of nutrients. They really leach things out. But you can see the difference between these terra preta soils, as they call them, and just an unamended soil in the same region. We did some radiocarbon dating and analyses, and found that it was a mix of charcoal, animal bones, broken pottery, other material, and excreta. So a variety of organic materials, but charcoal was a main constituent of those soils. And they found that those charcoal fragments were between hundreds and thousands of years old. So this is also why it's become a big conversation for soil carbon sequestration, is that we have this natural example of humans putting charcoal into the soil and that carbon staying there for a very long time. And kind of the science behind why that carbon in a charcoal fragment would stick around in the soil and not be degraded is that you have in organic chemistry, you have like aliphatic and aromatic compounds, and aliphatic, I heard someone describe them recently, are wiggly, and aromatic are closed, and I think that's a nice way to think about it, is that, you know, we have these rings, and basically there's less physical or chemical opportunity for a microbe to consume this carbon compared to a more aliphatic compound. So when you have, when you produce biochar, especially at a higher temperature, you're going to have more aromatic carbon in that material, and it's less likely to be broken down. And then some of the benefits of actually applying biochar to soils as a soil amendment. It can improve soil structure and soil aggregate formation, like we've talked about. There's a lot of studies that show it can reduce the bioavailability of heavy metals and contaminants. So sometimes it's used for remediation purposes, especially in like you know, remediating mine sites or something like that. They'll apply biochar to soils. It'll also improve the soil microbial activity, and really because you have this kind of like porous structure you're adding, it creates like a little house for soil microbes and big biofilms and things like that. And it also really improves the water retention and nutrient retention through a variety of chemical processes, but like chemical bonding will hang on to water and nutrients a lot longer compared to an unamended soil. But there's a lot of applications for biochar in agricultural systems, especially I think in California. So it can be applied to soil itself as an amendment, but it can also be used in composting, and it can reduce some harmful greenhouse gas emissions from composting, and also improve the quality of that compost end product. There's also studies of people using it as an actual feedstock for livestock, and it can reduce methane production from cattle, and also like to improve animal welfare and used as like a bed material in chicken production facilities because so much ammonia is produced and it can actually absorb that ammonia and improve the quality of life of those animals. Prevents the ammonia from burning their beef, but there's a number of ways that it's used in ag systems. I think that's my last biochar slide, so I'm happy to answer questions about biochar. Yeah, go ahead.
So applying it directly, say like you're gonna apply to lines, I've heard discussions about making sure it's activated or I guess integrated with like worm compost or microorganisms.
That's a great point, and I think the activated word is like sometimes a little like, yeah, what does that mean? But mixing it with an organic material like that is really important because it can actually, if it's like raw and you have a big quantity of it, it can spontaneously combust, and I have seen it happen. And so mixing it with compost or some other, I wouldn't say wood chips, I would say like a wetter organic material, you'll probably have more success with it. And I've also, I worked on this study applying it in almond orchards, and that's where we have all of these problems. And it can be hard to apply with like a normal compost spreader because it's such a light material. And so mixing it in with something a bit heavier, you'll probably have more success there. Yeah. But there's some work from Napa RCD where they did apply it in vineyard systems, and I think they found some good water and nutrient retention.
Can I say something? Basically, I've gone through a lot of seminars like this, and I got the theory down. Now I have to put this into a real practice, okay? I've got a small vineyard. I would say the vast majority of small farms in San Diego County are small, less than 5 acres, okay? We're not gonna be able to buy a piece of equipment that we use once a year, okay? If the government, your agencies and all want to help, they can buy the equipment and rent it to us, or it's just not available. If you want to find a 4-foot wide drill, you can't find them. So I would prefer not to till my soil up in the alleys, even though because I planted a cover crop and had a really nice cover crop. Now what do I do? Do I till it in, or do I drill the seed in this next year to have another cover crop? These are really practical things as to how you implement what everybody is saying. I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm going to have cover crops, but it's really hard when we don't have a lot of rain. It's like going to Vegas. So, but small farms cannot buy this piece of equipment and let it sit for a year. It just doesn't make sense. And I don't know how you implement some of this. That's the problem.
No, it's such a good point, and I encourage you to talk to Rachel because we're kind of trying to get this information on a regional basis about like what equipment is needed, so we could, build up equipment sharing programs through the RCDs. And I know that there's a lot of impracticalities in doing that, but we do want to advocate for better state support to have the equipment to implement these practices.
I tried using, somebody lent me a compost spreader. Compost spreaders are not made to put something smoothly down on. So I had to go back out in the field and rake it down because it dumped something in the compost that I got from San Pasquale, okay? It wouldn't spread it evenly. So when I put the seeds down, I had to go back and spread it again. It's a lot of work.
It is, yeah. But these are the things that we want to hear, are these actual stories from producers about the specific issues that you're having with equipment and, trying to find solutions to it.
If you have a large vineyard like over here, maybe you can justify it, okay? I can't justify a compost spreader that's 4 foot wide that will go through my rows, okay? But I'd love to rent it if I could find it.
Yeah.
But nobody's got that.
Yeah.
And nobody's got a seed drill.
Have you talked to TurboScape?
I don't know TurboScape.
Okay.
What do they do?
TurboScape has a couple of options. They have one that they will blow in to your vineyard, and it's the bark blower, the thin bark blower.
Yeah.
And so that they they bring that to your vineyard and they can blow the mulch or compost in. They're just hard to get a hold of, and they only have one machine, and they have like 11 huge trucks that hold 60 yards. And if you have, like I do, I have like one road that's got asphalt, they can bring it and blow it in, and they can do it on hillsides as well. And that's been super effective.
I put mulch up fortunately my vineyard's fairly flat.
Okay.
Okay. I put mulch up underneath my vines 3 years ago. Okay, 150 yards of it. I shoveled it into the back of a gator, took it out to the field, shoveled it out of a gator. Took me 2 months. So I looked for some blower people. They quoted me $10,000
Yeah,
to do
that's
it.
ridiculous.
And is that what you're talking about?
No, no way would they charge that. They charged me for 120 yards was $3,000 blowing it in. That was just this year.
Including the mulch?
No, I paid separate for that,
Okay.
which I got for a reasonable price from San Pascal, and I used Cal Native, which is a mix of compost and mulch.
Yeah, I used that last year.
Yeah,
But-
$6.
We hear you. I mean, I know that these are persistent issues, but these are the issues that we do want to solve, especially for smaller operations. And I know that there's, inherent barriers to both accessing funding and then actually implementing the practices that you want to implement, right? So
I think the county would really help us that way by providing that part of it.
Mhm.
Because the state's providing the materials, the county perhaps, or the state could pick up that piece of it, and that would really help.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really what we ultimately want to do is to have these regional stories about, like you're talking about, I can't find a seed drill, I can't find a compost spreader that's the appropriate size for my operation. So then we can aggregate that data on a regional basis and then take it to the state and say, hey, you want us to do these things to mitigate climate change. Here's a list of what we need to do,
It's different in Sonoma maybe.
Exactly.
Than it is
Well,
down here.
and no,
because
that's the
This is
issue.
the rainfall.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I do have a device that we bought that I can tell you about later if you want. It's a small leaf vacuum that we turned into a blower, and I believe it holds 3 yards. If you'd be interested in that, we spent around $5,000 on it. But we load it with either a pitchfork or our tractor, and then we attach a long hose and we blow it on ourselves. So we've used it on our grove. It takes more time, but it's effective. It does a very nice job of spreading a very fine mist of the mulch and compost. I'll show it to you if you want to see it.
With compost mulch up underneath the vines, you have to do it about 3 years. Okay, so that's
Okay.
what you've got to do about every 3 years.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. I mean,
Well,
it should be better instead of
It's not as expensive as the transportation is as much as the mulch.
right.
Okay.
Our cost of transporting with delivery was more than the mulch.
Yep.
It was $350 per delivery to get
Yep.
out to Duluth,
Mhm.
and the mulch was like 200 and change.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Well,
Yeah.
and I looked at the Healthy Soil Program and if I signed up for 3 years, I'd be losing a lot of money because one, it didn't have, you had different categories and you can't compost and cover crop in the same year.
Yeah, no, that's a big, it is a big.
It's just, who wrote that?
With healthy soil.
I mean,
Yeah.
They have 2 separate applications. They expected us to lay it down individually, and I asked them if they would allow me to do the blend at one time, and they said yes.
Okay. Yeah, I know, and I mean, we communicate closely with CDFA, so those are the kinds of things that we want to relay to them about limitations of the program, because I know a lot of people rely on healthy soils, but there are these limitations that should be addressed.
well, I planted it myself without grants, okay, because I drank the Kool-Aid. Okay, I'm gonna try this. And last year was supposed to be an El Nino year, and I got twice the amount of rain that I normally would. And it worked great.
Okay.
Now, what do I do?
How come you're doing it once every 3 years? Is that what vineyards require?
No, I'm talking about underneath the vines. This is mulching versus cover cropping.
Okay, right. So-
Mulching, I put a 3-foot section up underneath all the row, the vine.
Mhm.
Okay, but it degrades over 3 years.
Right, the soil eats it up.
Yep,
Yeah.
it does, and it actually reduces the nitrogen to the plants as it.
Yeah, if you're putting something heavy carbon down, you can have a nitrate
Yep,
deficiency.
I
Yeah.
found when I did it that I had to add more nitrogen and all because I mulched.
I mean, it's a process building soil, and that's not, I would never tell you otherwise, but. I think we're over time, so I think I am gonna leave it here. I was gonna talk about compost, but everyone seems to know a lot about compost. But happy to stick around and answer a couple more questions.
So if